30,000 feet above the lunar surface, an alarm starts blaring inside the lunar module Eagle. It's a code the two astronauts have never seen. The spacecraft is hurtling toward the ground. Down in Houston, a room full of engineers has exactly 6 seconds to decide whether to abort, while 600 million people watch live from Earth. Driven by a force far more powerful than simple curiosity. The Apollo program was born directly from the most intense geopolitical panic of the 20th century. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched a small metal sphere into Earth's orbit. It was called Sputnik. It did nothing except broadcast a simple radio beep, but that beep terrified the American public. The logic was inescapable. If the Soviets could put a satellite in orbit, they could put a nuclear warhead in orbit. Suddenly, the sky itself felt like a threat, and for the first time, Americans felt genuinely vulnerable on their own soil. 4 years later, the Soviets struck again. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space. Soviet leadership used the flight as a massive propaganda victory, declaring that their system was winning the race to the future. Furious and determined, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress less than a month later and made one of the most audacious promises. He committed America to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. The entire scientific community was stunned. America had only managed to put one astronaut in space for 15 minutes. Looking at this scale model, you can see the overwhelming 238,000-mile gap they had to cross. But the technology to cross that void, the rockets, landing modules, and computers, simply did not exist yet. Kennedy was promising to solve problems that nobody knew how to solve yet. He was declaring a 9-year engineering war to ensure America's survival in a new frontier. NASA mobilized with almost unlimited funding. At its peak, the Apollo program employed over 400,000 people and consumed 4% of the entire federal budget. They built the Saturn V. It stood 36 stories tall. At liftoff, its engines generated more thrust than 85 Hoover dams combined, creating vibrations that were felt 30 miles away. But rushing complex engineering has lethal consequences. In January 1967, a fire broke out inside the Apollo Lone Command Module during a ground test. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were trapped inside, and all 3 died. The program was grounded. For 17 months, NASA reviewed every inch of the spacecraft, making hundreds of design changes and severely compressing an already tight deadline. Achieving the moon landing required paying a blood price. Every engineer and astronaut understood that the timeline they were chasing was inherently dangerous. By July 1969, NASA was ready. Commander Neil Armstrong was chosen for his legendary calm. During one test flight, he had ejected from a disintegrating aircraft and simply walked back to his office to fill out paperwork. While Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended toward the lunar surface, Michael Collins remained alone in the command module. Orbiting the far side of the moon, completely out of radio contact, he became the most isolated human being in our species' history. Back in the descending lunar module, the alarm is still blaring. In Houston, a 26-year-old guidance officer named Steve Bales recognizes the code. The computer is overloading, but it is not critical. He makes a split-second call. Go. They continue the descent, but the computer is steering them directly into a field of massive boulders. As their fuel drains, from 60 seconds down to 30, a landing there would be fatal. Armstrong takes manual control. Looking out the window, he flies the spacecraft horizontally over the terrain like a helicopter, searching for a flat patch of dust. With exactly 17 seconds of fuel remaining, he touches down. His radio call to Houston is perfectly steady. The Eagle has landed. In mission control, men who had worked 18-hour days for years buried their faces in their hands and wept. 6 hours later, Armstrong placed his foot on another world. Aldrin joined him soon after, looking out at the vast, empty gray landscape and describing it as magnificent desolation. Before they left, they planted an American flag and a plaque. A mission born of Cold War paranoia ended with a message that read, "We came in peace for all mankind." But the men left behind a technological legacy too. To navigate to the moon and back, NASA needed immense computing power that weighed almost nothing. Those extreme constraints forced the refinement of a brand new invention, the integrated circuit. Those early chips powered the Apollo navigation computers. Today, they are the direct ancestors of the hardware in the smartphones sitting in your pocket and the telecommunications networks that connect the planet. The pressure cooker of the 1960s space race forced innovation at a blistering pace, accidentally building the foundation for the entire modern digital world. Late in his life, Neil Armstrong reflected on what it felt like to stand on the moon and look back at his home. He realized he could raise his hand, extend his thumb, and completely cover the Earth. Everything human beings had ever known, every war, every achievement, and every life, was small enough to be obscured by a single thumbnail. That journey proved that the impossible is usually just an unsolved engineering problem. But looking back proved something else, exactly how precious and fragile our only